The monitor flatlined for exactly 6 seconds as I lay there alone in that cold hospital room, and in those brief moments between life and death, it wasn't my own life that flashed before my eyes. It was my daughter Emma's face, and the realization that she might never know what I had sacrificed for her. The nurses rushed in, their shoes squeaking against the polished floor, shouting medical terms I couldn't understand through the fog of pain. My vision blurred as they worked frantically around me, adjusting tubes, pressing buttons, checking vitals. I felt detached, as though I was floating above my body, watching the scene unfold from the ceiling. The sharp smell of antiseptic filled my nostrils, mixing with the metallic taste of fear in my mouth. "Stay with us, Mrs. Sullivan," a young nurse with kind eyes shouted, her voice echoing in my ears as though coming from the end of a long tunnel. My phone sat silent on the bedside table, its screen dark and empty, just like it had been for the past 3 weeks. No calls, no messages, no sign that my only daughter even knew or cared that I was fighting for my life in Boston General. The same daughter whose life I had saved just months earlier, though she had no idea. The same daughter who now couldn't spare even a moment to check if her mother was alive or dead. The cardiac monitor resumed its steady beeping, pulling me back from the brink. I gasped, air filling my lungs like fire, tears streaming down my face, not from the physical pain, but from the ache that had taken permanent residence in my chest since Emma had walked out of my life. "You're stable now, Mrs. Sullivan," the doctor said, checking my charts with a practiced eye. "But we need to be more careful. Your heart can't take much more stress." I wanted to laugh. Stress? He had no idea. He couldn't see the invisible wounds that were killing me more efficiently than any physical ailment. The wounds of betrayal, of ingratitude, of a mother's love turned to ash. Through the window of my hospital room, I could see the Boston skyline, the same city where Emma now lived her new life, just 15 minutes away by car, yet somehow unreachable across an ocean of silence and resentment. The city lights blurred through my tears as darkness fell, marking another day of my solitary vigil. The night nurse came in, adjusting my IV with gentle hands. "No visitors today either, Mrs. Sullivan?" she asked, her voice careful, trying to hide the pity I could clearly see in her eyes. I shook my head, unable to speak past the lump in my throat. How could I tell her that the person who should be here, my flesh and blood, didn't even know I had sold everything I owned to save her life, that while I lay here, possibly dying, my daughter was living the life I had purchased for her with my very future? My fingers trembled as I reached for the small leather-bound journal on my nightstand, the one place where I had documented everything, every transaction, every sacrifice, every betrayal, the truth that Emma never bothered to learn. As I opened its worn pages, memories flooded back, sharp and cutting like broken glass. I began to write, my hand shaking, but determined. If these were to be my final days, at least the truth would survive me. At least someone would know what really happened between a mother who gave everything and a daughter who took it all without a backward glance. The monitor beside me beeped steadily, counting down the precious moments of my life, while outside my window, somewhere in the sprawling cityscape, Emma continued her existence, blissfully unaware that the mother she had discarded was fading away in silence. Tomorrow would mark 1 month since my admission. 1 month of staring at the door, hoping for a face that never appeared. 1 month of nursing not just my failing body, but a broken heart that no surgeon could ever repair. I never thought I'd be invisible to my own child. Never imagined I would become nothing more than a ghost in her life, present only in the blood that runs through her veins, the life I had given twice, once at birth, and once again 6 months ago when she needed me most. And as I drifted into an uneasy sleep, one thought consumed me. She never knew. My daughter never knew that while she refused to visit me in my hospital bed, I had emptied my life savings, sold my home, and sacrificed everything to pay for the surgery that saved her life. My name is Patricia Sullivan. I'm 63 years old, a retired high school English teacher from Lexington, Massachusetts, and for the past 30 days, I've been a patient at Boston General Hospital, recovering from a heart attack that nearly claimed my life. The doctors say it was brought on by stress, by pushing myself too hard, by ignoring the warning signs. They don't know the half of it. Before all this, I lived a quiet life in the small colonial house where I'd raised Emma after her father left us when she was just 4 years old. It was nothing fancy. 3 bedrooms, a small garden where I grew tomatoes and basil in the summer, walls lined with books collected over decades of teaching literature to teenagers. It was home, my refuge, the place where I had created a life for my daughter and myself out of the ruins of abandonment. Every morning for 30 years, I would wake before dawn, grade papers at my kitchen table while sipping coffee from the mug Emma had made me in second grade, lopsided and painted with crooked purple flowers. I'd pack my lunch, drive to Lexington High School, and spend my days trying to make Hemingway and Shakespeare matter to distracted teenagers. Then I'd come home, cook dinner, help Emma with homework, and after she went to bed, I'd grade more papers until my eyes burned. We weren't rich. A teacher's salary only stretches so far, but we had enough. I put away a little each month for Emma's college fund, skipping vacations and buying secondhand clothes so that she could have opportunities I never had. When she got accepted to Boston University 7 years ago, it was the proudest day of my life. Now, I spend my days in this sterile hospital room, counting the ceiling tiles, listening to the rhythmic beep of machines, and waiting for a phone call that never comes. The nurses have become my family. Maria, who brings me extra Jell-O. Tony, who tells me about his grandkids while checking my blood pressure. Dr. Patel, who speaks to me with gentle honesty about my prognosis. "Your recovery is progressing, Patricia, but slowly," he told me yesterday, his dark eyes serious behind wire-rimmed glasses. "The damage to your heart was significant. You'll need to make major lifestyle changes when you go home." Home. The word hung in the air between us, neither of us acknowledging that home no longer existed, that the house where Emma took her first steps, where I'd nursed her through chickenpox and heartbreaks, had been sold 3 months ago to pay for her emergency spinal surgery after a car accident threatened to leave her paralyzed. The irony doesn't escape me. While I lie here with a damaged heart in the physical sense, my emotional heart was shattered long before any medical emergency. It broke the day Emma moved to Boston after college and slowly began pulling away, canceling our weekly dinners, forgetting my birthday, becoming a stranger who shared my DNA but little else. My hospital room is sparse, but for a few personal items. The journal, a faded photograph of Emma at her college graduation, the last time I remember her smiling at me with genuine warmth, and a small ceramic angel that my mother gave me before she died. "For protection," she had said. Some protection it turned out to be. The nurses whisper about me when they think I can't hear. The woman whose daughter never visits. The mother whose emergency contact is her former neighbor, Susan, who comes twice a week with fresh nightgowns and sad eyes. They don't understand how a child could abandon a parent this way. Neither do I. Yesterday, I found the strength to shuffle to the bathroom with my IV stand as my awkward dance partner. The mirror showed a stranger, thin, pale, with hollow cheeks and gray hair that hung limp around a face, etched with lines of worry and disappointment. When did I become old? When did I become invisible? Outside my window, summer is fading into fall. The maple trees on the hospital grounds are beginning to turn crimson at their edges. Emma always loved autumn, the crunch of leaves beneath her boots, the smell of cinnamon and apples that would fill our kitchen when I baked pies on Sunday afternoons. I wonder if she still loves those things, or if she's shed those memories along with me. The social worker, Ms. Bennett, visited me this morning, concern evident in the furrow between her eyebrows. "We need to discuss your discharge plan, Mrs. Sullivan," she said, flipping through my file. "Do you have someone who can help you at home during your recovery?" The question hung in the air, heavy with unspoken truths. I looked away, focusing on a bird perched on the windowsill. Free, unencumbered, able to fly away from pain. "I'll manage," I said finally, the words tasting bitter on my tongue. I always have. But the truth that I couldn't bring myself to share was that there is no home to return to. Just a small rented apartment in Dorchester that I haven't even seen yet, arranged by Susan through a series of phone calls and emails while I was still in intensive care. An empty space waiting to be filled with what remains of my life after I gave everything to a daughter who couldn't even be bothered to pick up the phone. As darkness falls once more over Boston, I close my eyes and try to remember Emma's laughter, the weight of her hand in mine when she was small, the sound of her voice calling Mom, with love instead of irritation. These memories are all that remain of the life I thought we shared, the life I sacrificed everything to preserve when she needed me most. It started with small things, as betrayals often do. Missed phone calls, canceled dinners, excuses that grew increasingly elaborate and transparent. I told myself she was busy building her new life in the city, working her way up at the marketing firm that had hired her straight out of college. I made excuses for her absence, filling the growing silence between us with rationalizations that rang hollow even to my own ears. Then came her 30th birthday, 6 months ago. I had planned for weeks, made reservations at Giuliana's, her favorite Italian restaurant in the North End, bought a delicate silver bracelet I couldn't really afford, even baked her favorite chocolate raspberry cake to bring to her apartment after dinner. I wore my best dress, navy blue with small pearl buttons, and took the commuter train into the city, excitement building with each mile that brought me closer to my only child. I remember standing outside her Beacon Hill apartment building, birthday cake balanced carefully in my hands, pressing the buzzer with my elbow. Once, twice, 3 times. The February wind cut through my coat, carrying snowflakes that melted against my flushed cheeks as I waited. Finally, I called her cell phone, shifting from foot to keep warm. "Mom?" Her voice sounded strange, distant, annoyed, with the muffled quality of a crowded room in the background. Music pulsed behind her words. Laughter, the clink of glasses. "Emma, sweetheart, I'm outside your building. For your birthday dinner? At Giuliana's, remember?" The words tumbled out, already tinged with the first inklings of dread. A long pause. Then, "That was tonight? Oh God, Mom, I completely forgot. I'm actually at the Liberty with some work friends. We're celebrating a big client signing and..." I stood there, snowflakes accumulating on the cake box, as my daughter's excuses washed over me. No mention of rescheduling, no invitation to join them. Just the clear message that I was an obligation forgotten, an intrusion on her real life. "It's fine," I said, my voice tight with the effort of holding back tears. "We can do it another time. Thanks for understanding, Mom. I gotta go. Brian's trying to get me to do tequila shots. Love you." The call ended before I could respond. "Love you." The words felt hollow, automatic, like the sign-off on a business email. I took the train back to Lexington that night, the untouched cake beside me, tears freezing on my cheeks before they could fall. I told myself it was just one birthday, just one disappointment in a lifetime of moments. But deep down, I knew it was more. It was the clearest sign yet that I was becoming peripheral in my daughter's life, a footnote rather than a chapter. 2 weeks later, Emma called, not to apologize or reschedule our dinner, but because she needed something. Her voice was different this time, soft, vulnerable, reminiscent of the little girl who would crawl into my bed during thunderstorms. "Mom, I need to tell you something." Her words were careful, measured. "I've been having these pains in my back and legs. I finally went to a doctor last week and they found something." My world tilted on its axis as she explained. A rare type of tumor growing along her spine, pressing on nerves, threatening her mobility. The specialist she'd seen was recommending immediate surgery, but her insurance would only cover part of it. The words blurred together as panic rose in my throat. Words like experimental and out-of-network and $70,000. "I don't know what to do, Mom," she whispered, her voice breaking. "I'm scared." In that moment, all the missed dinners, forgotten birthdays, and growing distance vanished. This was my baby, my child, my heart walking around outside my body. Of course I would help her. Of course I would find a way. "Don't worry about the money," I told her, already mentally calculating the value of my house, my retirement account, the small inheritance from my mother. "We'll figure it out. I promise." The relief in her voice was palpable. "Thanks, Mom. I knew I could count on you." For 2 weeks, I became Emma's advocate, researching specialists, calling insurance companies, transferring funds from accounts untouched for decades. I remortgaged the house I had paid off 5 years earlier. I cashed in the retirement fund I had built over 30 years of teaching. I sold my car and the antique jewelry my grandmother had left me. The surgery was scheduled for March 15th at Massachusetts General. I arrived at the hospital at dawn, my heart in my throat as they wheeled my daughter into the operating room. For 8 hours, I sat in the waiting room, drinking vending machine coffee gone cold, praying to a God I wasn't sure I believed in anymore. When the surgeon finally emerged, his face was tired but satisfied. "The procedure went well," he said. "We were able to remove the entire tumor. With physical therapy, she should make a full recovery." The relief was so intense I had to sit down, my legs suddenly unable to support me. She would walk. She would live. Nothing else mattered. Emma remained in the hospital for a week. I stayed by her side, sleeping in the uncomfortable visitor's chair, helping her to the bathroom, feeding her ice chips when the pain medication made her nauseous. As she began to recover, I noticed her growing restless with my constant presence, irritated by my hovering, my questions, my concern. "Mom, you don't need to be here all the time," she said on the 5th day, not meeting my eyes. "I'm fine. The nurses are here. And Derek is coming later." Derek, the boyfriend I had met only twice, who seemed to regard me with a mixture of polite disinterest and barely concealed impatience. "I don't mind," I said, trying to hide the hurt. "I want to be here for you." She sighed, the sound sharp with annoyance. "Honestly, you're kind of in the way. Derek and I need some space to talk about things." I left that afternoon, telling myself she was just frustrated by her situation, that her irritability was normal for someone recovering from major surgery. But as I drove back to my now mortgaged home, a coldness settled in my chest that had nothing to do with the March chill. When Emma was discharged, Derek picked her up. I stood awkwardly in the hospital corridor, watching as he helped her into a wheelchair, as a nurse reviewed her care instructions, with him, not me. "I thought maybe you could come stay at the house while you recover," I suggested hesitantly. "Your old room is still the same, and I could help with your physical therapy." Emma exchanged a look with Derek that I couldn't interpret. "Actually, I'm going to stay at Derek's. His place is more accessible. No stairs." The lie was transparent. My bedroom had been on the 1st floor since I had my knee replaced 3 years earlier, but I nodded, swallowing the protest that rose to my lips. "Call me if you need anything," I said as they prepared to leave. "Anything at all." "Sure, Mom," she replied, already looking past me toward the exit, toward her life that increasingly had no place for me. I stood in the hospital parking lot, watching Derek's sleek Audi disappear around the corner, taking my daughter away from me. I didn't know then that it would be the last time I would see her face to face. I didn't know that the distance between us, which had been growing for years, was about to become an unbridgeable chasm. I didn't know that 3 months later, I would be the one in a hospital bed, fighting for my life, with nothing but silence from the daughter whose life I had sacrificed everything to save. I remember the day Emma was born as if it were yesterday, not 30 years ago. 20 hours of labor that felt like being torn apart from the inside, the sterile smell of the delivery room, the sound of my own voice, strange and primal, as I pushed my daughter into the world. And then, suddenly, she was there, 6 pounds, 4 ounces of pink, wrinkled perfection, with a shock of dark hair and eyes that seemed to hold all the wisdom of the universe. "She's beautiful," the nurse said, placing her in my arms. "What's her name?" "Emma," I whispered, the name I had chosen months earlier, after the Jane Austen character who grows and learns throughout her story. Emma Patricia Sullivan. Robert, my husband, wasn't there. He was at a conference in Chicago, or so he claimed. I would later discover he was with his administrative assistant in a hotel that had nothing to do with business. But in that moment, his absence didn't matter. It was just Emma and me, beginning our journey together, forming a bond that I believed would withstand anything. When Emma was 4, Robert left us. A note on the kitchen table, half his clothes gone from the closet, joint bank accounts emptied. "I was never meant to be a father," he wrote, as if parenthood were a sweater he could simply take off when it no longer fit. I remember sitting at the kitchen table, the note crumpled in my fist, wondering how I would tell my daughter that her father had chosen a new life over her. That night, I held Emma as she cried herself to sleep, her small body racked with sobs she didn't fully understand. "Why doesn't Daddy love us anymore?" she asked, her voice small and broken in the darkness of her bedroom, surrounded by stuffed animals and glow-in-the-dark stars we had stuck to her ceiling together. "Sometimes people don't know how to love properly," I told her, searching for words that would comfort without lying. "But I love you enough for both of us. I will always love you enough." And I did. I rearranged my entire life around giving Emma everything she needed. I took on extra tutoring jobs after school to make up for Robert's missing child support. I learned to fix leaky faucets and change the oil in my car because we couldn't afford to pay someone else to do it. I sewed Halloween costumes and baked birthday cakes and sat up through nights of fevers and nightmares. When Emma was 7, she developed pneumonia so severe she had to be hospitalized for a week. I slept in a chair by her bed every night, my back screaming in protest, reading Charlotte's Web aloud even when her fever made her too delirious to understand the words. The medical bills afterward nearly bankrupted us, but I picked up a weekend job at a local bookstore and paid them off penny by penny over the next 2 years. On Emma's 10th birthday, I surprised her with a kitten, a small orange tabby she named Fitzgerald after the author we had been reading together. I was allergic to cats, my eyes swelling and throat itching whenever Fitzgerald decided to sleep on my pillow. But Emma's joy was worth every sneeze and every dose of antihistamine. When she was 13, and her body began changing in ways that confused and frightened her, I took her shopping for her first bra, making the experience a celebration rather than something embarrassing. We went for ice cream afterward, and I told her stories about my own awkward adolescence, until she was laughing so hard strawberry ice cream came out of her nose. At 16, when she had her heart broken by a boy named Jason, who took another girl to the winter formal, I sat on the edge of her bed and stroked her hair as she cried, then helped her pick out a dress so stunning that Jason spent the entire dance staring at what he had given up. I took photographs of her in that midnight blue dress, her eyes still slightly red but her smile radiant, and thought my heart would burst with pride. College applications during her senior year meant late nights at the kitchen table, empty coffee mugs creating rings on her essays, my red pen gently suggesting revisions while trying not to overstep. When the acceptance letter from Boston University arrived, her dream school, we danced around the kitchen, Fitzgerald watching us with feline disdain from his perch on the refrigerator. The cost of BU was staggering, far more than I had managed to save despite decades of careful budgeting. But I found a way. I took out a second mortgage on the house, picked up summer school teaching, and sold the small piece of lakefront property in New Hampshire that had been in my family for generations. "You can't sell the lake house," Emma protested when I told her. "You love it there. It's the only place you ever relax." "I love you more," I said simply, "and this education is your future." Move-in day at the freshman dorm, I helped her arrange her tiny room, hanging fairy lights and arranging books on shelves, both of us pretending that I wasn't going to drive home to an empty house and cry myself to sleep. As I prepared to leave, she hugged me tightly, burying her face in my shoulder like she used to do as a little girl. "I wouldn't be here without you, Mom," she whispered. "Thank you for everything." In that moment, every sacrifice, every long night, every penny pinched felt worth it. This was what motherhood was, giving your child wings and the courage to fly, even when it broke your heart to see them leave. The college years brought changes. Emma's visits home became less frequent, her calls shorter. I told myself this was normal, healthy even. She was building her own life, forming her identity separate from mine. When she decided to stay in Boston after graduation, accepting a position at a marketing firm downtown, I masked my disappointment with enthusiasm. Boston wasn't far. We could still have our Sunday dinners. She could still come home for holidays. For a while, we did maintain those connections. She would take the train out to Lexington once or twice a month. I would cook her favorite meals, chicken parmesan or beef stew with dumplings. We would sit at the kitchen table, Fitzgerald purring in her lap. He had always preferred her, despite my being the one who fed him daily. And she would tell me about her job, her friends, the excitement of city life. But gradually, those visits grew less frequent. Our phone calls became shorter, more perfunctory. When Fitzgerald died at the age of 15, I buried him in the backyard alone, under the maple tree where he used to hunt chipmunks. Emma said she couldn't get away from work to come home, even for a day. I didn't tell her how I sat by that small grave for hours, crying not just for the cat, but for all that seemed to be slipping away from me. Looking back now, I can see the pattern forming, the slow erosion of our relationship that I was too close to recognize. Like water dripping on stone, time and distance were wearing away what I had believed was unbreakable. But I kept believing, kept hoping that the bond forged through decades of love and sacrifice would prove stronger than whatever was pulling us apart. Even as I signed away my house to pay for her surgery, even as I emptied accounts meant to sustain me through my old age, I never doubted that I was doing the right thing. She was my daughter, my child, the best part of me. How could I not give everything I had to save her? What I couldn't see, what I refused to see, was that somewhere along the way, the Emma who had once clung to me during thunderstorms, who had wept in my arms over childhood disappointments, who had danced with me in the kitchen over college acceptances, had disappeared. In her place was a stranger who wore my daughter's face, but whose heart had turned away from me so completely that even my sacrifice would not be enough to bring her back. It was a Tuesday when I received the letter that would shatter what remained of my illusions. 3 weeks after Emma's surgery, still adjusting to the reality of my newly mortgaged house and depleted savings, I opened my mailbox to find an envelope from Massachusetts General Hospital. Thinking it was yet another bill related to Emma's procedure, I opened it at the kitchen table, bracing myself for more financial strain. Instead, I found a thank you letter addressed to the Sullivan family for our generous donation to the hospital's spinal research department. According to the letter, a donation of $50,000 had been made in Emma's name following her successful surgery. My hands began to shake so violently that the paper rattled. $50,000. The exact amount that had mysteriously disappeared from my bank account the day after Emma's procedure. The money I had assumed went to pay for medical expenses not covered by insurance, the money that represented the last of my safety net. I called the hospital's donation department with numb lips, my voice sounding strange and distant to my own ears. Yes, the donation was made by Derek Harmon on behalf of Emma Sullivan, the cheerful woman on the phone confirmed. Such a generous young couple. Mr. Harmon mentioned they wanted to give back after Ms. Sullivan's successful treatment. Derek Harmon, Emma's boyfriend, the man who had barely acknowledged my existence during her hospital stay. He had taken my money, the funds I had transferred to Emma for her medical expenses, and donated it in their names. Not a cent of it had come from them. The room seemed to tilt around me as the implications sank in. Either Emma had knowingly participated in this deception, allowing her boyfriend to use my life savings to make them look philanthropic, or she was completely unaware of where the money for her surgery had actually come from. Neither possibility offered any comfort. With trembling fingers, I dialed Emma's number. 1 ring, 2, 3, voicemail. I tried again an hour later. Same result. I sent a text. Need to talk to you about something important. Please call me. By evening, when I still hadn't heard back, I made a decision I would later regret. I got in my car and drove to Boston, to the Beacon Hill address where my daughter lived, the same building where I had stood in the snow on her birthday, forgotten and unwanted. But this time, I wasn't bringing cake and presents. I was bringing questions that demanded answers. The early June evening was warm, the air heavy with the scent of blooming roses from the small garden in front of her building. I pressed the buzzer for apartment 3B, steeling myself for whatever would come next. To my surprise, the door buzzed open immediately. Taking a deep breath, I climbed the 3 flights of stairs, my knee protesting each step, the pain a dull counterpoint to the sharper ache in my chest. At her door, I hesitated only briefly before knocking. The door swung open to reveal not Emma, but Derek. He was dressed in expensive-looking loungewear, a glass of red wine in his hand, his expression shifting from expectation to obvious dismay when he saw me. "Mrs. Sullivan," he said, blocking the doorway with his body. "Emma didn't mention you were coming by." "She doesn't know," I admitted. "Is she home? I need to speak with her." He hesitated, glancing over his shoulder into the apartment. "She's actually in the shower. We're about to go out to dinner with some friends. Can this wait?" Before I could answer, I heard Emma's voice from inside the apartment. "Babe, who is it? If it's the Uber Eats guy, tell him we canceled the order." "It's your mother," Derek called back, his eyes never leaving my face, watching for my reaction. There was a moment of silence, then the sound of footsteps. Emma appeared behind Derek, her hair wet from the shower, wearing a bathrobe, her expression a mixture of surprise and something that looked uncomfortably like annoyance. "Mom, what are you doing here? I've been trying to reach you all day," I said, fighting to keep my voice steady. "I needed to talk to you about something important." She sighed, exchanging a look with Derek that made me feel like an intrusion, a nuisance. "We're kind of in a rush. We have reservations at Sorellina in 45 minutes. Sorellina, one of the most expensive restaurants in Boston, the kind of place where a dinner for 2 would cost what I now budgeted for a month of groceries." Something inside me snapped. "I just need 5 minutes," I said, my voice hardening. "It's about the $50,000 donation made in your name to Massachusetts General." Emma's brow furrowed in confusion. "What donation?" Derek's posture changed subtly, tension radiating from his shoulders. "Let's not do this right now," he said, his tone placating but with an edge of warning. "Why don't you call tomorrow, Mrs. Sullivan, and you and Emma can—" "Did you know?" I interrupted, looking directly at my daughter, "that the money you told me you needed for your medical expenses, the money I got by taking a second mortgage on my house and emptying my retirement account, was donated to the hospital by your boyfriend, in your name." Emma's face drained of color. She looked at Derek, who had the grace to look uncomfortable. "What is she talking about?" she asked him. "It was supposed to be a surprise," he said smoothly. "I was going to tell you tonight at dinner. The hospital called to say they're putting our names on a plaque in the new wing. It's great publicity for both our careers." "Our names?" Emma repeated, still looking confused. "But where did the money come from? That's what I'd like to know," I said, my voice shaking now with barely suppressed rage, because that $50,000 was the last of my savings. Money I gave you because you told me you needed it for expenses your insurance wouldn't cover. Realization dawned on Emma's face, followed by a flash of what might have been shame, quickly replaced by defensiveness. "Mom, I had no idea Derek was going to do this, but it's not like the money went to waste. It's funding important research." "Research," I repeated, the word bitter on my tongue. "And what about my future? The house I can no longer afford? Did you even think about that when you asked me for money you apparently didn't need? You offered." Emma's voice rose, taking on the indignant tone I recognized from her teenage years when caught in a lie. "I never asked you to remortgage your house. That was your choice." "My choice?" The words felt like stones in my mouth. What choice did I have when my daughter told me she needed help to pay for surgery? What mother wouldn't do everything in her power? "Oh, here we go," Emma said, rolling her eyes. "Mother of the Year, making sure everyone knows what a martyr she is." Her words hit me like a physical blow. I took a step back, steadying myself against the hallway wall, suddenly aware of a pain in my chest that had nothing to do with my emotional distress, a sharp, squeezing sensation that stole my breath. "Emma, enough," Derek said, a note of alarm in his voice as he looked at me. "Mrs. Sullivan, are you all right? You don't look well." I couldn't answer. The pressure in my chest was intensifying, radiating down my left arm. Black spots danced at the edges of my vision. I heard Emma's voice, suddenly stripped of its anger, calling my name as if from a great distance. Then nothing. I woke in yet another hospital room, the familiar beeping of machines my first indication that I was still alive. A doctor I didn't recognize was checking my vitals, his expression grave. "Mrs. Sullivan," he said when he saw I was conscious, "you've had a heart attack, a serious one. You're stable now, but we'll need to run more tests." I tried to speak, but my throat was raw from intubation. The doctor gave me a small sip of water through a straw. "Your daughter brought you in," he continued. "She's in the waiting room. Would you like to see her?" "Emma." The argument on her doorstep came flooding back. The revelation about the donation, her callous words, the look in her eyes that told me I was nothing but an inconvenience in her carefully curated life. Slowly, painfully, I shook my head. The doctor frowned. "Are you sure? She's been waiting for several hours." "Tell her," I managed, my voice a harsh whisper, "to go to her dinner reservation. I'm sure they're holding the table." It was cruel, perhaps, but in that moment, the thought of seeing Emma, of having to face the reality of how little I meant to her, was more than my newly damaged heart could bear. Later that night, a nurse told me that Emma had indeed left, promising to return the following day, but she didn't come. Not the next day, or the day after that. Just a text message. "Hope you're feeling better. Swamped at work. We'll try to visit soon." As days turned into a week, and then two, the absence of my only child became a presence in itself, a gaping hole more painful than the surgical wound from my emergency cardiac procedure. Nurses would look at me with pity when no visitors arrived bearing flowers or magazines or the simple comfort of familiar faces. Once, I overheard two of them talking outside my door, unaware that I was awake. "The daughter never comes," one said. "Not once since the patient was transferred from ICU. Some people shouldn't have children if they're not going to be there when it matters," the other replied. I closed my eyes, hot tears sliding down my temples into my hair. If only they knew. If only they understood that I had given everything, my home, my security, my very heart, to a daughter who couldn't even spare an hour to sit by my hospital bed. The final humiliation came 3 weeks into my hospital stay. My social worker, Ms. Bennett, entered my room with an uncomfortable expression, a folder clutched in her hands. "Mrs. Sullivan, I've been trying to arrange your discharge plan. but there seems to be an issue with your insurance." I listened numbly as she explained that my coverage was insufficient for the rehabilitation facility the doctors were recommending, that without additional funds or family to care for me at home, my options were limited. "I've reached out to your emergency contact," she said, not quite meeting my eyes. "Your daughter, to discuss possible solutions." "And?" I asked, already knowing the answer. She expressed concern about her ability to help, given her work schedule and living situation. Ms. Bennett's professional veneer cracked slightly, revealing genuine dismay. She suggested we look into state assistance programs. State assistance. My daughter, the same daughter whose life I had saved twice, once through birth and once through financial sacrifice, was suggesting I turn to government aid rather than disrupting her dinner plans or dipping into the money I now knew she and Derek had. That night, alone in my hospital room, I pulled out the journal I had been keeping and wrote until my hand cramped and tears blurred the ink on the page. I wrote about love and betrayal, about sacrifice and ingratitude. I wrote about a mother's heart, broken not once but twice, first by emotion and then by medical crisis. I wrote the truth I had been avoiding for years. My daughter was gone. The Emma I had raised, the child I had loved beyond reason, had vanished, replaced by a stranger who wore her face but carried none of her heart. And as I wrote, something inside me shifted, a tectonic movement of my soul. The pain didn't lessen, but it changed, hardening into something else, something that might, with time, become a different kind of strength. That night, as rain lashed against my hospital window and thunder rumbled in the distance, I experienced what I can only describe as an awakening. Lying in the sterile darkness, listening to the steady beep of my heart monitor, I began to see my life with Emma and myself with a clarity that had eluded me for years. I had always defined myself first and foremost as Emma's mother. Even after she grew up and moved away, my identity remained anchored to that role. Every decision I made, from the smallest daily choice to the largest financial commitment, was filtered through the lens of how it would affect her, what it would mean for her future, how it might strengthen or damage our relationship. But who was I beyond that? Who was Patricia Sullivan, when not viewed as Emma's mother or Robert's abandoned wife? I realized with a start that I didn't know. Somewhere along my life's journey, I had lost myself in the all-consuming tide of maternal sacrifice. "Enough," I whispered into the darkness, the word hanging in the air like a declaration of independence. Enough now. Morning came, gray light filtering through the blinds, and with it arrived Dr. Patel for his daily rounds. This time, I listened differently as he discussed my condition, my prognosis, my future care needs. I asked questions, not as Emma's mother worried about who would take care of her, but as Patricia, a woman determined to take care of herself. "I want to understand exactly what happened to my heart," I said, sitting up straighter against my pillows, "and what I need to do to recover fully." Dr. Patel seemed pleased by my engagement. "You experienced what we call a myocardial infarction, a heart attack, caused by severely blocked coronary arteries. We've placed 2 stents to keep those arteries open. With proper medication, diet, and exercise, many patients go on to live full, active lives. And without proper care?" I asked, holding his gaze. His expression grew serious. "Then the prognosis is much less favorable. This is not something to take lightly, Mrs. Sullivan." "Patricia," I corrected him, "and I'm not taking it lightly. Not anymore." That afternoon, I asked for a laptop. Susan, my former neighbor who had been visiting faithfully twice a week, brought her old one the next day. While she chattered about neighborhood gossip and the unseasonably warm weather, I began to research heart health, cardiac rehabilitation programs, support groups for heart attack survivors. I created spreadsheets of medication costs, dietary recommendations, exercise regimens appropriate for someone in my condition. "You seem different," Susan observed as she prepared to leave, studying my face with the insight of someone who had known me for decades. "More, I don't know, present." I smiled, the expression feeling strange on my face after weeks of despair. "I'm finding myself again, I think." After she left, I turned my attention to the practical matters I had been avoiding. Using Susan's laptop, I accessed my bank accounts, tallying what little remained after the financial hemorrhage of the past months. It wasn't much, barely enough for 3 months of basic expenses in the small apartment Susan had arranged for me in Dorchester. I needed income. My teacher's pension would eventually resume, but it had been disrupted by paperwork issues related to my hospitalization. I couldn't return to classroom teaching in my condition, but perhaps there were other options. Online tutoring, freelance editing, writing the memoir I had always talked about but never started. As I explored possibilities, a notification popped up on my screen. An email from Massachusetts General Hospital's Development Office, thanking Ms. Emma Sullivan and Mr. Derek Harmon for their continued support, and inviting them to an exclusive donor reception the following month. Attached was a digital proof of the plaque that would bear their names in the hospital's new research wing. My first instinct was familiar, the sharp pain of betrayal, the urge to call Emma and demand an explanation. But something had changed. I looked at the email, at the evidence of my daughter's moral failure, and felt something unexpected: pity. I pitied the woman my daughter had become, someone so hollow, so desperate for status and recognition, that she would build it on her mother's sacrifice without a second thought. I pitied Derek, whose character was revealed in his willingness to use my money for his social advancement. Most of all, I pitied the relationship they had, built on appearances rather than substance, on what could be gained rather than what could be given. For the first time since my heart attack, I closed my eyes and slept without dreams of reconciliation, without the fantasy that Emma would suddenly appear at my bedside, tearful and remorseful. Instead, I dreamed of the ocean, vast and blue and boundless, and myself, swimming strongly toward a horizon that kept expanding with each stroke. The next morning, Ms. Bennett returned with more paperwork and concern etched on her face. "We need to finalize your discharge plan, Mrs. Sullivan. Without family support or sufficient insurance coverage for the rehabilitation facility, our options are limited." I met her gaze steadily. "I've been doing some research. There's a cardiac support program through the Community Health Center in Dorchester, near the apartment I'll be moving to. It's subsidized for seniors. I'd like to enroll in that." She blinked, clearly surprised by my proactive approach. "That's an excellent program, actually, but it requires regular attendance. Transportation might be an issue without someone to drive you." "The apartment is on a bus line," I said. "I've already checked the schedule, and for days when I'm not feeling well enough for public transportation, there are rideshare services. I've budgeted for that." Ms. Bennett studied me, her professional reserve softening. "You've given this a lot of thought." "I've had nothing but time," I replied with a small smile, "and motivation." Over the next few days, I continued making arrangements for my new life, a life I was designing for myself, by myself. I contacted my former department head at Lexington High School, who put me in touch with an online education platform looking for experienced literature teachers. The pay was modest, but I could work from home, setting my own hours around my recovery needs. I reached out to the local library near my new apartment, inquiring about book clubs and volunteer opportunities. I researched heart-healthy cooking classes, senior yoga programs, writing workshops. I was building not just a recovery plan, but a life plan, one that acknowledged my limitations but wasn't defined by them. One evening, as I sat with my journal, documenting this strange metamorphosis taking place within me, my phone rang. Emma's name flashed on the screen. My heart, my damaged, healing heart, lurched in my chest. For a moment, my finger hovered over the answer button, old habits and hopes surging through me. Then I remembered the plaque with her name, the dinner reservation more important than my health crisis, the weeks of silence as I lay recovering from near death, the casual cruelty of suggesting state assistance rather than family support. I set the phone down and watched it ring until the screen went dark. Later, I listened to her voicemail. "Hey Mom, just checking in. Haven't heard from you in a while. Hope everything's okay at the hospital. Call me when you can." Her tone was light, casual, the voice of someone fulfilling an obligation rather than expressing genuine concern. I didn't call back. That night, I wrote in my journal, "Today I chose myself, not out of bitterness or revenge, but out of self-preservation, out of the belated recognition that I too am worthy of care, my own care, if no one else's. This is not the end of loving Emma. That will never end. But it is the end of allowing that love to consume me until nothing of Patricia remains." The next morning, Dr. Patel informed me that I would be discharged in 3 days. "Your recovery is progressing well," he said. "Not as quickly as I'd like, but well enough for outpatient care, provided you follow the regimen we've discussed." "I will," I promised, and meant it. This heart, this broken, healing organ, was now my responsibility. Mine to strengthen, mine to protect. As Dr. Patel turned to leave, he hesitated at the door. Your neighbor, Susan, mentioned that you'll be living alone after discharge. Yes, I said simply. That's unusual for someone in your condition, he said carefully. Most patients have family support during recovery. I'm not most patients, I replied, and I'm finding that unusual doesn't mean impossible. He studied me for a long moment, then nodded. No, it doesn't. But it does mean you'll need to be vigilant. Any chest pain, shortness of breath, unusual fatigue, you call 911 immediately. No heroics, no waiting to see if it passes. Understood? Understood, I agreed. I've come too far to be careless now. On my final night in the hospital, I stood at the window of my room, looking out at the Boston skyline glittering in the darkness. Somewhere out there was Emma, living her life, perhaps at this very moment enjoying dinner at an expensive restaurant with Derek, both of them basking in the social capital of their generous donation to spinal research. For a brief moment, familiar pain washed through me. Then I took a deep breath, feeling the miracle of air filling lungs, of blood pumping through a damaged but resilient heart, and let it go. Not forgiveness exactly, not yet, but a releasing of the active hurt, a setting down of a burden I had carried for too long. Tomorrow I would leave this hospital and begin again, not as Emma's mother, but as Patricia Sullivan, a woman with a broken heart in more ways than one, but with the courage to allow both kinds of healing to begin. The small apartment in Dorchester wasn't much. A bedroom, a tiny kitchen, a living area just large enough for a secondhand sofa, and the bookshelves Susan had salvaged from my house before the new owners took possession. But as I stood in the center of it on my first day out of the hospital, I felt something unexpected. Possibility. This space, unlike my house in Lexington, carried no memories of Emma's childhood, no echoes of past family dinners or holidays. It was a blank canvas, waiting for me to fill it with whatever came next in my life. Susan had arranged for basic groceries to be delivered and had placed a vase of cheerful yellow daisies on the kitchen counter. It's not much, she apologized, but it's a start. It's perfect, I said, and meant it. Thank you for everything. After she left, promising to check on me the next day, I moved slowly around the apartment, familiarizing myself with my new home. My medications were lined up on the bathroom counter. My clothes hung in the small closet. On the bedside table sat my journal, and beside it, a folder containing my discharge paperwork and follow-up care instructions. As I picked up the folder, a business card fell out. One I didn't recognize. Leonard Abramowitz, attorney at law. On the back, scrawled in what I recognized as Dr. Patel's handwriting. Just in case. No charge for initial consultation. I stared at the card, puzzled. Why would Dr. Patel slip me a lawyer's card? Setting it aside, I began unpacking the few personal items Susan had brought from my house. Photographs in frames, my mother's ceramic angel, a quilt my grandmother had made. At the bottom of the box, wrapped in tissue paper, was something unexpected. A small wooden box I hadn't seen in years. With a jolt, I recognized my father's old cigar box, the one he had kept his important papers in. I had stored it in the back of my closet after his death 15 years ago, intending to sort through it but never finding the time. Sitting on the edge of my bed, I opened the box carefully. Inside were the documents I remembered. My father's honorable discharge from the Navy, his marriage certificate, the deed to the small house in Connecticut where I grew up. But beneath these familiar papers was something else. A thick envelope with my name written on it in my father's precise handwriting. With trembling fingers, I opened it, pulling out several pages covered in his distinctive script, along with what appeared to be legal documents. My dearest Patricia, the letter began. If you're reading this, I'm no longer with you. There are some things I never told you. Things I perhaps should have shared years ago, but couldn't find the right time or words. I read on, my confusion growing with each paragraph. My father wrote about his time in the Navy, about an investment he had made with a fellow sailor in what was then a small, unknown technology company, about how that investment, seemingly worthless for decades, had suddenly become valuable in his final years. I've established a trust, he wrote, the proceeds from my share in the company, managed carefully by people I trust. I never touched this money during my lifetime. Your mother and I had all we needed. This is for you, Patricia. For your future. For emergencies I pray will never come." The accompanying legal documents confirmed what seemed impossible. A trust in my name, managed by a firm in Hartford, Connecticut. According to the most recent statement, included with the papers, the value stood at just over $400,000. $400,000. A sum that would have seemed like a fantasy just months ago, when I was emptying my accounts to pay for Emma's surgery. A sum that could change everything about my current situation. My first instinct was to call Emma, to share this unexpected windfall. Then I remembered the donor plaque with her name, the missed hospital visits, the casual suggestion that I seek state aid rather than family support. I set the papers down and took a deep breath, feeling my way through this new reality. This money wasn't just currency. It was possibility, security, freedom, the means to rebuild what I had sacrificed. But more importantly, it was a secret, my secret, something that belonged only to me, unknown to Emma or Derek or anyone who might try to claim it for their own purposes. The next morning, I called the number for the trust management company in Hartford. After verifying my identity, I was connected to a Mr. Winters, who expressed surprise at finally hearing from me. "We've been sending statements to your Lexington address for years, Ms. Sullivan," he explained. "When they weren't acknowledged, we assumed you preferred not to access the funds. I never received them," I said, thinking of how easily mail could be misplaced or overlooked in the chaos of daily life. Or perhaps, a darker thought suggested, intercepted by someone else. "Well, the good news is that the trust has performed exceptionally well," Mr. Winters continued. "Your father's initial investment has grown considerably through careful management. You have full access to the funds now, as the sole beneficiary." "I'd like to keep this account confidential," I said. "Is that possible?" "Of course," he replied. "Client confidentiality is our highest priority. We would never disclose information about your finances to anyone without your explicit permission." After the call, I sat at my small kitchen table, the trust documents spread before me, and began to plan. First, I would need to consult with a financial advisor about how best to use these funds. Some would need to go toward my medical expenses and securing appropriate housing. Some could be invested to provide ongoing income to supplement my teacher's pension. But before all that, I needed to understand exactly what had happened with Emma and the donation to Massachusetts General. For that, I would need legal help. I reached for Dr. Patel's card and made the call. Leonard Abramovitz turned out to be a small, energetic man in his 60s with wire-rimmed glasses and a no-nonsense manner that I found immediately reassuring. He agreed to meet me at my apartment the following day, waving away my concerns about his coming to me rather than me visiting his office. "Heart attack survivors don't need to be running all over Boston for legal consultations," he said briskly. "I'll bring coffee. You like coffee? Or is that off the cardiac diet?" The next morning, he arrived punctually at 10, bearing not just coffee, decaf, he assured me, but also bagels from what he claimed was the only authentic Jewish bakery in the city. "Dr. Patel is an old friend," he explained as I poured the coffee into mugs. "He mentioned your situation. In general terms, of course. Doctor-patient confidentiality and all that. But he was concerned." "About my legal situation?" I asked, puzzled. "About you being taken advantage of," Leonard corrected, his tone gentle but direct. "He said you mentioned something about money for medical expenses being used for a donation instead. So I told him everything. The $50,000 transferred to Emma for her uncovered medical expenses, the discovery of the donation made in her and Derek's names, the confrontation that had triggered my heart attack. As I spoke, Leonard took notes, occasionally asking for clarification, but mostly just listening intently. When I finished, he set down his pen and regarded me seriously. "What you've described could potentially constitute fraud, Patricia. If you gave money for a specific purpose, medical expenses, and it was knowingly used for something else without your consent, that's problematic from a legal standpoint." "I don't want to sue my daughter," I said quickly, the very thought making my newly fragile heart race. "I just want to understand what happened, and maybe recover some of what I lost." Leonard nodded thoughtfully. "A reasonable approach. First, we need to gather evidence. The transfer of funds from your account to Emma's, the correspondence where the purpose of the money was discussed, the donation acknowledgement from the hospital. I have most of that," I said. emails, bank statements, the thank you letter. Good, he said. Next, I suggest we send a formal letter to the hospital's development office, explaining that the donation was made without your knowledge or consent, using funds that were intended for medical care. We can request that the donation be reversed, or at minimum, that the recognition be amended to acknowledge you as the actual donor. And if they refuse? Leonard's expression hardened slightly. Then we have options, ranging from a formal demand letter to legal action. But let's start with the assumption that once the facts are clear, both the hospital and your daughter will want to do the right thing. I wasn't so sure about Emma and Derek wanting to do the right thing, given their behavior thus far. But I nodded agreement, one step at a time. After Leonard left, with plans to draft the letter to Massachusetts General, I turned my attention to the trust documents again. With my newfound legal and financial knowledge growing by the day, I began to see possibilities I hadn't considered before. I could buy a small condo instead of renting indefinitely. I could invest in the online teaching platform I'd been contracting with, potentially securing a more stable position. I could even establish my own small scholarship fund for students like I had once been. Bright, but financially constrained. For the first time since my heart attack, I felt not just accepting of my new reality, but excited by it. This hidden resource, this gift from my father across time, wasn't just money. It was agency, power, the ability to reshape my life according to my own design, rather than in reaction to crisis. A week later, Leonard called with surprising news. The hospital's development office has been remarkably responsive, he said. Once I explained the situation and provided the documentation, they expressed significant concern about the ethical implications. What does that mean? I asked. It means they're conducting an internal investigation. Apparently they take donor ethics very seriously. The idea that someone might be claiming recognition for a donation they didn't actually make has them quite disturbed. They've already offered to update their records to reflect you as the donor, if that's what you want. I considered this. What about the money? The actual $50,000? That's where it gets interesting, Leonard said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. The hospital has offered to return the donation in full, citing donor intent not being properly honored. They'd rather return the funds than be associated with what they're calling potentially unethical donor recognition practices. I sat down, my legs suddenly weak. They're going to give back $50,000? Just like that? Plus interest, Leonard added. They're quite eager to resolve this without publicity. Wealthy donors tend to get nervous when they hear about donation funds being mishandled. 2 days later, I received an official letter from Massachusetts General Hospital, expressing their sincere regret for the misunderstanding regarding the donation made in the names of Emma Sullivan and Derek Harmon. Enclosed was a check for $53,642.17, the original donation plus interest. That same day, I received a text from Emma. "Mom, what the hell? The hospital called about some donation issue. Derek is freaking out. Call me ASAP." I didn't call. Instead, I took the check to my new bank and deposited it into an account bearing only my name. Then I called Mr. Winters at the trust management company and scheduled an appointment to discuss my financial future. A future that, for the first time in decades, I was planning for myself alone. That night, I wrote in my journal, "Today, I reclaimed something that was taken from me. Not just money, but dignity. The right to determine how my own resources are used. The power to say, 'This is mine, not yours to take.' It feels less like vengeance and more like justice, restoration of a natural order that should never have been disturbed." My phone continued to buzz with texts and calls from Emma throughout the evening. I turned it off and slept more soundly than I had in months. In the morning, I woke to a beautiful early summer day, sunlight streaming through my apartment windows. I made myself a cup of tea and sat by the window, watching the neighborhood come to life. Children walking to school, people heading to work, an elderly couple strolling hand in hand down the sidewalk. I thought about Emma, about the flurry of increasingly angry messages she had left, about how, for perhaps the first time in her adult life, she was experiencing the consequences of her actions. Not punishment. I had no desire or energy for that, but simply the natural result of choices made. My father's letter lay on the table beside me, his words offering wisdom across time. "Life will bring storms, Patricia. That's certain. What matters is not how well you weather them, though that matters too, but what you build in their aftermath. Sometimes the most beautiful gardens grow where lightning has struck. I picked up my phone and turned it back on, but not to call Emma. Instead, I called my new cardiac care center to confirm my first rehabilitation appointment. Then, I called Susan to thank her again for her help and to invite her for dinner at my apartment the following week. Then, with a steady hand that surprised me, I emailed Leonard Abramowitz to discuss my next steps, not just regarding Emma and the donation, but regarding my new life. A life funded not just by my father's unexpected gift or the return donation, but by my own newfound resolve to value myself as much as I had always valued others. The secret was out now, not just the trust or the fraudulent donation, but the deeper truth I had hidden even from myself, that I was stronger than I had believed, more resourceful, more deserving of care and consideration. And as I looked out at the summer sky, I felt something I hadn't experienced in a very long time, the quiet satisfaction of standing firmly in my own power. 2 weeks into my new life, I had established routines that centered around my recovery and rebuilding. Mornings began with the gentle yoga exercises recommended by my cardiac rehabilitation therapist. Afternoons were dedicated to my online teaching work, literature classes for high school students needing extra support or advanced challenges. Evenings were for reading, writing in my journal, and occasionally having dinner with Susan or my new neighbor, Eleanor, a retired librarian who had knocked on my door with a houseplant and an invitation to her book club. I was healing, not just my heart, but my sense of self. The woman who looked back at me from the mirror each morning was becoming someone I recognized again, someone who existed independently of her role as a mother or her status as abandoned. Emma's attempts to contact me had evolved from angry demands for explanation to grudging inquiries about my health, to finally, a stilted apology. "I'm sorry if there was a misunderstanding about the donation. I never meant for you to find out that way." Not, "I'm sorry I took your money under false pretenses." Not, "I'm sorry I let Derek use your life savings for our social advancement." Just sorry that I had discovered the deception. Sorry, in essence, that I had ruined their plan. I didn't respond. My silence, I knew, was more unsettling to Emma than any angry retort could have been. She had expected me to react as I always had, with emotion, with immediate forgiveness, with an eagerness to smooth things over regardless of the cost to myself. My refusal to engage deprived her of the familiar dynamic, leaving her unbalanced and uncertain. Leonard had advised me to maintain this distance while we proceeded with what he called Phase 2 of my recovery plan, securing my financial future and ensuring I was protected from further exploitation. "Your daughter may not have acted alone in the donation situation," he pointed out during one of our regular meetings in my apartment. "This boyfriend, Derek, he seems to have been the driving force. But the fact remains that she allowed it to happen, even benefited from it. That suggests a certain callousness that we need to be mindful of." I nodded, the truth of his words painful, but undeniable. "What exactly are you suggesting?" Leonard spread several documents on my kitchen table. "I'm suggesting we put protections in place. A living trust to manage your assets, including the funds from your father's trust in the return donation. A healthcare proxy that designates someone other than Emma to make medical decisions if you're incapacitated, and a will that clearly specifies your wishes regarding your estate. You think Emma would try to take advantage if I were incapacitated again?" The question hurt to ask, but I needed to face possibilities I had previously refused to consider. Leonard's expression was compassionate, but firm. "I think the evidence suggests she and Derek have a pattern of prioritizing their own interests over your well-being. It would be irresponsible not to protect you from that possibility." So we began the process of fortifying my new life against potential threats. I named Susan as my healthcare proxy, with Eleanor as backup. I established the living trust with Leonard as trustee, giving him authority to manage my financial affairs if I became unable to do so. And I drafted a will that, while still providing for Emma, included specific provisions to prevent manipulation or misuse of the inheritance. "What about the money that's still unaccounted for?" Leonard asked as we reviewed the documents. "You mentioned transferring $70,000 for Emma's medical expenses, but only $50,000 went to the donation. What happened to the other $20,000? I had wondered the same thing but had been reluctant to pursue it. Does it matter now? I got the 50 back. Maybe the 20 really did go to medical expenses." Leonard's expression was skeptical. "Perhaps, but clarity matters. Would you like me to inquire about that as well? After a moment's hesitation, I nodded. Yes, I think I need to know the full truth, even if it's painful. While Leonard investigated, I continued building my new life. I joined a heart health support group at the community center, where I met others who understood the particular challenges of recovering from cardiac events. I started volunteering 2 mornings a week at the local library, helping with their literacy program for adult learners. I even began tentatively dating a fellow cardiac patient, Richard, a widowed former architect with kind eyes and a dry wit that made me laugh for the first time in months. You're looking well, Dr. Patel observed during my 6-week follow-up appointment. Your numbers are improving. Whatever you're doing, keep doing it. I'm living, I said simply. Not just surviving. He smiled. That's the best medicine there is. 3 days later, Leonard called with news that confirmed my worst suspicions about the missing $20,000. I subpoenaed Emma's and Derek's bank records as part of our investigation into the donation, he explained. The $20,000 was transferred from Emma's account to a joint account she shares with Derek the day after you sent her the $70,000. From there, it was used for a down payment on a Range Rover registered in Derek's name. A car. My money I had obtained by remortgaging my home, had been used to buy Derek a luxury SUV while I was left with nothing but mounting medical bills and an uncertain future. Are you all right, Patricia? Leonard asked when I didn't immediately respond. Yes, I said, surprised to find it was true. Yes, I'm all right. It hurts, but it doesn't surprise me anymore. That's progress, I suppose. Do you want to pursue recovery of these funds as well? I considered the question carefully. What would that involve? Similar to the donation situation, but potentially more complicated. We could demand repayment, and if they refuse, file suit for fraud and conversion of funds. It would likely become contentious. More contentious than it already is? I asked with a wry smile. Fair point, Leonard acknowledged, but litigation is stressful. Given your cardiac condition, I want to be certain you understand what you'd be undertaking. I thought about the $20,000, what it represented in terms of my sacrificed security, and what it revealed about Emma and Derek's character. I thought about the stress of a legal battle versus the stress of knowing I had allowed them to profit from their deception. Send them a demand letter, I decided. Let's see how they respond before deciding on next steps. The letter went out the following day, formal, detailed, unflinching in its recounting of the facts. Emma called within hours of receiving it, her voice shrill with indignation when I finally answered. A lawyer, Mom? Really? You're suing me over money you gave me for my surgery? Money that was used to buy Derek a Range Rover, I corrected, my voice calm. Not for your medical care, as you claimed when you asked for it. That's not, she sputtered, then shifted tactics. Derek needed a reliable car to drive me to physical therapy appointments. My insurance didn't cover transportation. Your insurance also apparently didn't require the $50,000 donation that was made in your names, I noted. Strange how that works. Mom, you're being ridiculous. It was a gift. You offered to help with my medical expenses. How I allocated that help is my business. I closed my eyes, feeling a familiar pain in my chest that had nothing to do with my cardiac condition. No, Emma, it wasn't a gift. It was money I gave you for a specific purpose. A purpose you and Derek misrepresented. That's called fraud. Fraud. Her voice rose an octave. You're accusing your own daughter of fraud? What kind of mother does that? The question hung in the air between us, loaded with all the emotional manipulation that had characterized our relationship for years. In the past, it would have worked. I would have backpedaled, apologized, done anything to repair the rift regardless of the cost to myself. But not anymore. The kind of mother who finally recognizes that she deserves better, I answered quietly. The kind who has spent her entire life putting her child first, only to end up alone in a hospital room while that child couldn't be bothered to visit. The kind who nearly died and realized afterward that she wants whatever time she has left to be lived with dignity. This is about the hospital visits? Emma's tone turned incredulous. I told you I was swamped at work. I texted you every day. This is about a pattern, Emma. A pattern of taking without giving back, of expecting sacrifice without gratitude, of treating me as a resource rather than a person. My voice remained steady, though my hand holding the phone shook slightly. The money is just a symptom. There was a long silence. Then, in a voice that chilled me with its calculation, Fine. If that's how you want to play this. Derek's father is a partner at Coleman & Witts. You really want to go up against one of the biggest law firms in Boston over a car? It's not about the car, I said. It's about the truth, about consequences, about boundaries that should have been established long ago. Boundaries, she repeated, as if the word were foreign to her. So this is what? Tough love? Some kind of twisted revenge because I didn't hold your hand in the hospital? No, I said simply. This is self-respect. Something I should have modeled for you long before now. Maybe things would be different if I had. I ended the call as she was still protesting, her words growing increasingly desperate and angry. My hands were shaking, but my resolve remained firm. This wasn't the emotional confrontation Emma had been expecting, the kind she knew how to manipulate and win. This was something else entirely. A measured, strategic response from a woman who had finally found her voice and her value. That evening, I received an email from Derek, the first direct communication I'd ever had from him. It was coolly professional, outlining all the reasons why their use of the funds was justified, hinting at legal countermeasures they would take if I persisted, suggesting that at my age and with my health issues, I should focus on healing rather than creating family discord. I forwarded it to Leonard without comment. His response came within the hour. Classic intimidation tactics. They're worried. Let's proceed as planned. The next day, I received another call. This one from a name I didn't recognize, but a voice that introduced itself as Gerald Harmon, Derek's father, and a senior partner at Coleman & Witts. Mrs. Sullivan, he began, his tone managing to be simultaneously condescending and threatening. I think there's been a misunderstanding that we should clear up before things get unfortunate. I don't believe there's any misunderstanding, Mr. Harmon, I replied. The facts are quite clear. Your son and my daughter obtained money from me under false pretenses and used it for purposes other than what was represented. That's one interpretation, he said smoothly. Another might be that you generously helped your daughter during a medical crisis, and she and her boyfriend made decisions about allocation of resources that you now, retroactively, disapprove of. I'm not sure that rises to the level of fraud in any court. I guess we'll find out, I said. My attorney seems to think otherwise. Yes, Leonard Abramowitz. Gerald's tone suggested he was examining something distasteful. A competent enough attorney for certain matters, but this kind of complex financial dispute? I'm not sure he's quite equipped for that level of litigation. We'll see, I said again, refusing to be baited. Is there something specific you wanted to discuss, Mr. Harmon? Or did you just call to try to intimidate me? There was a moment of startled silence before he recovered. I'm calling to suggest a resolution that might be satisfactory to all parties. Derek is prepared to return $10,000, half the amount in question, as a gesture of goodwill. In exchange, you would drop all claims and sign a confidentiality agreement regarding the matter. Half. After everything, they were offering half, and with a gag order attached. That's not acceptable, I said firmly. The amount is $20,000 in full, plus interest as calculated by my attorney. There will be no confidentiality agreement. Mrs. Sullivan, be reasonable. Derek is just starting his career. This kind of financial burden, the kind he took on willingly when he used my money to buy himself a luxury vehicle, I interrupted. That kind of burden? Gerald Harmon's tone hardened. I'm trying to help you avoid a protracted legal battle that would be expensive and stressful for everyone involved. My offer is generous considering the circumstances. Your offer is inadequate considering the facts, I countered. $20,000 in full plus interest. Those are my terms. I'll have to consult with my son, he said stiffly. Do that, I agreed. And while you're at it, you might want to look at the documentation my attorney has compiled. Bank transfers, text messages, emails discussing the specific purpose of the funds. The facts are quite compelling. After he hung up, I sat in my small living room, heart racing, but mind clear. This was not the Patricia Sullivan of 6 months ago, the woman who would have accepted any crumb of reconciliation, who would have forgiven without accountability, who would have sacrificed her own interest to avoid conflict. This was a new Patricia, one who understood her worth, who recognized manipulation for what it was, who had learned that true love, for oneself or others, sometimes required holding firm rather than giving way. The following morning, Leonard called with news, A wire transfer for $21,600 had been received from Derek Harmon, the full amount plus calculated interest. No accompanying message, Leonard noted. No admission of wrongdoing, but the money speaks for itself. Yes, I agreed, a sense of quiet vindication washing over me. Yes, it does. 3 months after my heart attack, on a crisp September morning with hints of autumn coloring the Boston Common, I found myself sitting on a bench near the frog pond, waiting. The text had come the previous evening. Mom, we need to talk. In person. Tomorrow, 10 a.m., bench by the frog pond in Boston Common. Please. No demands this time. No accusations. Just please. A word I couldn't remember Emma using with me in years. I had consulted with Leonard before agreeing, unsure if this was another attempt at manipulation. Go, he advised. Hear what she has to say. But remember, you're in control of this narrative now, not her. So here I was, watching children chase each other around the pond's edge, feeling stronger than I had in months. My cardiac rehabilitation was progressing well. The online teaching position had become permanent, providing stable income to supplement my pension. My small apartment had become a true home, filled with books and plants, and the quiet contentment of a life lived on my own terms. I saw Emma before she saw me, walking purposefully along the path, her posture stiff with tension. She looked thinner than I remembered, dark circles visible beneath her eyes even from a distance. For a moment, maternal concern surged through me, the instinct to protect, to comfort, to make things better never fully extinguished despite everything. Then she spotted me, and her pace faltered. She approached slowly, uncertainty replacing her usual confidence. This, I realized, was new territory for us both. Mom, she said, stopping a few feet away. Thank you for coming. Of course, I replied, gesturing to the space beside me on the bench. Sit down. She did, leaving careful distance between us. We sat in silence for a moment, watching a small boy throw bread to eager ducks. You're looking well, she finally said. Better than at the hospital. I'm feeling better, I agreed. The cardiac rehabilitation program is excellent. More silence, stretching uncomfortable between us. Mom, Emma began, then stopped, seeming to struggle for words. I don't know how to do this. Do what? This. She gestured vaguely between us. Apologize. Make amends. Whatever you want to call it. I waited, giving her space to continue in her own way. Derek and I broke up, she said abruptly. After the whole car thing, the lawsuit, his father getting involved, it was too much. I'm sorry to hear that, I said, and meant it. Whatever Derek's flaws, I knew Emma had cared for him. She laughed, a brittle sound with no humor in it. Are you? Sorry, I mean? I'm sorry for your pain, I clarified. Not sorry that there were consequences for your actions. Emma flinched slightly but nodded. That's fair. More than fair, actually. She took a deep breath. I've been seeing a therapist since everything happened. She suggested I might have some issues with entitlement, with seeing others as resources rather than people. This admission, so unexpected, so contrary to the defensive Emma I had come to expect, caught me off guard. What do you think? I asked carefully. I think she's right. Emma stared down at her hands. I think somewhere along the way, I started believing I deserved things just because I wanted them. That other people, especially you, existed to provide those things. That my needs automatically outweighed everyone else's. I felt something shift in my chest. Not pain, but a loosening of something tight and guarded. That's insightful. It's awful, Emma corrected, looking up with tears in her eyes. It's awful to realize you've become someone who could let their mother remortgage her house to pay for a surgery, then use part of that money to buy your boyfriend a car. Someone who could be so cold when that same mother had a heart attack. A tear slipped down her cheek, followed by another. The hospital called me, when they decided to return the donation. The development director wanted to speak with me directly. She was very professional, very calm. But I could hear the judgment in her voice when she explained that they had discovered the funds came from you, not us. I hadn't known this part, that the hospital had contacted Emma directly. Leonard had handled the communications from our side. She asked me if I was aware that the donation had been made with money intended for my medical care. Emma continued. If I understood that my mother had sacrificed her financial security to ensure my health. If I realized how such actions reflected on my character, more tears now, falling freely. I couldn't answer her, because the truth was too shameful to admit. That yes, I knew. I knew, and I didn't care. Or didn't let myself care. I just saw what I could gain. Recognition, status, connections that might help my career. I reached out then, tentatively, and placed my hand over hers. Emma. No. She pulled back. Don't comfort me. I don't deserve it. Not yet. She wiped her face with the back of her hand. When Derek's father got involved, trying to intimidate you, I didn't stop him. Part of me was relieved, thinking he'd handle it, make it go away. Then when you didn't back down, when Leonard kept pushing, Derek started blaming me, said I had put him in an impossible position, that his father was disappointed in him. She laughed again, that same hollow sound. That's when I finally saw it, what we had done, not just to you but to ourselves. We had built this relationship on appearances, on what we could extract from others. There was nothing real there, nothing that could withstand actual challenge. I'm truly sorry about the relationship, I said gently. I'm not, Emma replied, surprising me again. It needed to end. I needed to see what I was becoming. She took a deep breath. My therapist suggested something else too, that I might have resented you for being such a good mother, for sacrificing so much, that on some level, I wanted to punish you for making me feel like I could never measure up to your goodness. This struck me with the force of revelation, that my own sacrifices, meant as expressions of love, might have created a burden of expectation Emma couldn't bear, that in trying to give her everything, I might have inadvertently made her feel inadequate. I never wanted you to measure up to anything, I said softly. I just wanted you to be happy. I know that now, Emma said, but I think I got confused somewhere. Started equating happiness with getting what I wanted, regardless of cost. Started seeing your love as something to be used rather than cherished. We sat in silence again, but it was different now. Heavy with truth, but somehow less strained. I don't expect you to forgive me, Emma said finally. I wouldn't, in your position, but I wanted you to know that I understand now, what I did, what it cost you. And I'm going to spend a long time trying to become someone better than that. I studied my daughter's face, the features so familiar yet somehow new to me in this moment of genuine remorse. Forgiveness isn't a single moment, Emma. It's a process, for both of us. Does that mean there's a chance for us to have some kind of relationship again? Yes, I said, surprising myself with how certain I felt. Yes, there's a chance, but it will have to be different, equal, with boundaries and respect on both sides. She nodded, wiping away fresh tears. I'd like that. To try, at least. So would I. We sat together as the morning deepened around us, watching children play and couples stroll hand in hand, not touching, not yet fully reconciled, but present with each other in a way we hadn't been in years, seeing each other clearly, perhaps for the first time. As we prepared to leave, Emma hesitated. There's something else you should know, about the hospital donation. What about it? When they returned the money to you, they also removed our names from the donor list. But last week, I went back, made a donation of my own, $5,000 from my savings. It's not much compared to what you gave, but it's a start. The first installment of what I plan to pay back over time. You didn't have to do that, I said, touched by the gesture. Yes, I did, Emma replied with quiet certainty. For myself as much as for you or the hospital. I need to make this right, whatever that takes. As we walked together toward the Park Street station, maintaining a careful distance but moving in the same direction, I felt something I had nearly forgotten. Hope. Not the desperate hope of earlier months when I had clung to any sign that Emma still cared, but something steadier and more grounded. Hope that through pain and truth, through falling and rising, both of us might find our way to something better than what we had lost. Would you like to have coffee sometime next week? Emma asked tentatively as we prepared to part ways. Just to talk? I'd like that, I said. Text me and we'll arrange it. She nodded, then surprised me by stepping forward for a quick, awkward hug, the first physical contact between us in months. Thank you, she whispered, for not giving up on me completely. As I watched her walk away, I realized that the greatest revelation of this ordeal wasn't about Emma at all. It was about me. About my capacity to love without losing myself, to forgive without forgetting the lessons learned, to find strength in vulnerability and power in truth. My heart, both the physical organ beating steadily in my chest and the metaphorical seat of my emotions, had been broken and mended, leaving scars but also new resilience, like the Japanese art of kintsugi, where broken pottery is repaired with gold, making the cracks part of the beauty rather than flaws to be hidden. I turned toward home, my small apartment waiting with its books and quiet comfort, the afternoon teaching session I had scheduled, the dinner plans with Richard later that evening, my life, rebuilt from fragments but perhaps stronger for having been broken. 1 year after my heart attack, I stood in the kitchen of my new condominium in Cambridge, arranging flowers in a vase, peonies my favorite, their pink blooms adding a splash of color to the sunlit room. The space was modest but entirely mine, purchased with the combination of my father's trust money and my own careful savings over the past year. Through the window, I could see the small courtyard garden shared by the residents of the building, a peaceful spot where I often sat with my morning coffee, watching birds visit the feeder I had installed. In an hour, guests would begin arriving for the small gathering I was hosting, a celebration not of any particular occasion, but of life itself, of survival and renewal. The doorbell rang, and I smiled, knowing who would be first to arrive. Emma was always punctual now, perhaps overcompensating for years of casual disregard for my time. "Hi, Mom," she said when I opened the door, offering a slightly tentative smile and a bottle of sparkling cider. "I know it's early, but I thought I could help you set up." "Perfect timing," I replied, accepting both the bottle and the quick hug she offered. I could use an extra pair of hands with the appetizers. Our relationship over the past year had been a careful reconstruction, not a return to what was, but the building of something new. Weekly coffee dates had evolved into occasional dinners, then into more regular involvement in each other's lives. There were still moments of tension, old patterns threatening to reassert themselves, but each time, we found our way back to the new understanding we had established that day in Boston Common. In the kitchen, Emma moved with easy familiarity, arranging cheese and crackers on a platter while I finished the flowers. "The place looks great, Mom," she said, glancing around the bright space with its shelves of books and carefully chosen furnishings. "Very you." "Thank you," I said, pleased by her observation. It was true. This home reflected me in a way my old house never quite had, filled as it was with the accumulated compromises and necessities of raising a child alone. "How was your date with Richard last night?" Emma asked, a teasing note in her voice. My relationship with Richard, which had evolved from fellow cardiac patients to friends to something more, was a source of gentle amusement to her. "Lovely," I replied, feeling a flush warm my cheeks. "We went to that new jazz club in Davis Square. And will he be joining us today?" She wiggled her eyebrows suggestively, making me laugh. "Yes, along with everyone else. No special treatment for the boyfriend." Boyfriend. The word still felt strange at 64, but no less accurate for my relationship with Richard. A kind, thoughtful man who understood the value of second chances because he'd been granted one himself. As we worked side by side in the kitchen, I marveled at how far we had come. Emma and I, from the dark days after my heart attack. She had followed through on her promise to make amends, not just with words, but with actions. The $5,000 donation to the hospital had been followed by regular contributions to a fund she had established in my name, the Patricia Sullivan Education Scholarship, providing support to single mothers pursuing teaching degrees. More meaningful than the financial restitution, however, was the emotional growth I had witnessed in her. The therapy she had begun in the aftermath of our confrontation had continued, helping her examine patterns and behaviors that had damaged not just our relationship, but her connections with others as well. She had changed jobs, leaving the high-pressure marketing firm for a position with a nonprofit focused on healthcare access, work that she described as having purpose beyond a paycheck. And she had been present during my recovery in ways that mattered, driving me to cardiac appointments when needed, helping me move into my new condominium, calling regularly just to check in. Small things that built trust one careful piece at a time. "I ran into Derek last week," Emma said suddenly, her hands stilling on the platter she was arranging. "At Whole Foods, of all places." I glanced at her, gauging her expression. "How was that?" She considered the question, then shrugged slightly. "Strange, awkward, but also clarifying, I guess. Seeing him now, after everything, I wonder what I ever saw in him. or who I was when I was with him. And who are you now? I asked gently. A small smile touched her lips. Someone trying to be better, more aware, more grateful. She met my eyes directly. Someone trying to be worthy of having you as my mother. The doorbell rang again before I could respond, saving us both from the emotion of the moment. That'll be Susan and Eleanor, I said, wiping my hands on a kitchen towel. Ready to face the crowd? Always, Emma replied with a grin, her professional poise reasserting itself. The afternoon unfolded beautifully, my small condominium filling with people who had become important parts of my new life. Susan, whose faithful friendship had sustained me through the darkest days. Eleanor, my neighbor-turned-friend who had introduced me to the book club that now met monthly in my living room. Richard, who held my hand unobtrusively under the table as we all shared a meal. Dr. Patel, who had saved my life, and then helped me rebuild it with his referral to Leonard. Leonard himself, whose legal expertise had been matched by his compassion and understanding. And Emma, moving among these people who had witnessed her absence and now her return, accepting their initial reserve with grace, earning their gradual warmth with her genuine efforts to make amends. As the afternoon light began to fade, casting long shadows across the courtyard garden, I found myself standing slightly apart, watching the animated conversations, the easy laughter, the connections being formed and strengthened in this space that was wholly mine. Richard approached, offering a glass of sparkling cider. You look pensive, he observed. Everything all right? Better than all right, I assured him. Just reflecting. He nodded, understanding in his eyes. A heart attack survivor himself, Richard knew the weight of second chances, the precious quality of time that had nearly been cut short. I was just thinking, I continued, about how sometimes we have to lose everything to find what really matters. How what seems like an ending can actually be the beginning of something better. The phoenix rising, Richard suggested, his hand warm against mine. Something like that, I agreed, though I prefer less dramatic metaphors. More like a garden in spring, new growth from soil that seemed barren. He smiled, the expression crinkling the corners of his eyes in a way I had come to cherish. Always the literature teacher. Some habits never change, I acknowledged with a smile of my own. Across the room, Emma was engaged in animated conversation with Dr. Patel, her expression earnest as she described some aspect of her work with the healthcare nonprofit. Catching my eye, she smiled, a real smile, reaching her eyes in a way that reminded me of the little girl who had once looked at me with uncomplicated love. In that moment, I felt the full circle of our journey, the pain and betrayal, the confrontation and truth, the slow rebuilding of trust. Not perfect, not complete, but genuine. A relationship between two adult women who saw each other clearly, with all their flaws and strengths, and chose to remain connected despite the difficult path that had brought them here. Later, as the gathering wound down and guests began to depart, Emma helped me clear away dishes, working companionably beside me in the kitchen. "Thank you for including me today," she said quietly. "I know it couldn't have been easy, having me here with all these people who saw what happened, who were there for you when I wasn't. They're part of my life now," I replied simply. "And so are you, in a different way than before. All of it matters." She nodded, understanding the boundaries that remained even as bridges were being rebuilt. "I'm glad that both things can be true." As she prepared to leave, Emma paused at the door. "Oh, I meant to tell you, I've been thinking about going back to school, for a master's in public health, to be better at the nonprofit work." "That sounds wonderful," I said, genuinely pleased for her. "You'd be excellent at that. It would mean taking evening classes, cutting back my hours at work, living on less for a while." She hesitated. "I've been saving, but I might need to look into student loans." I recognized the moment for what it was. Not just information shared, but a test of our new boundaries. In the past, I would have immediately offered financial assistance, emptying my own resources to smooth her path. We both knew it. "That's a big decision," I said carefully. "Have you looked into scholarship options? Your alma mater might have programs for returning students." Relief flickered in her eyes. Recognition that I was offering support without sacrificing myself. Guidance without rescue. "I have a meeting with their financial aid office next week, actually." "Smart move," I approved. "Let me know how it goes. I'm happy to look over any paperwork with you if that would help. Thanks, Mom. She hugged me, a real embrace this time, not the awkward gesture of our early reconciliation. For everything, for showing me how to be strong. After she left, I returned to the living room, where Richard was waiting, having offered to stay and help with the final cleanup. But instead of immediately tackling the few remaining glasses and plates, I went to the bookshelf and pulled out my journal, the one I had started in the hospital a year ago. Opening to the first entry, I read my own words, written in the darkest moment of my life. My daughter never visited me in the hospital. She didn't know I paid for her surgery. I don't know if either of us will survive this betrayal. Then I turned to the most recent entry, written just days ago. The heart is a remarkable organ, designed to keep beating despite injury, to heal itself, to adapt and continue. Perhaps the emotional heart is no different, scarred but stronger, broken but mended, forever changed but still, miraculously, capable of love. I closed the journal and returned it to its shelf, among the books and mementos of my life, both the one I had lived before my heart attack and the one I was creating now, day by day, choice by choice. Ready to finish up? Richard asked, his voice gentle with understanding. Yes, I said, turning toward him with a smile that felt as natural as breathing. I'm ready for whatever comes next. And I was, heart scarred but beating strongly, life rebuilt from fragments into something whole and authentic. A woman who had discovered, through the most painful of journeys, that sometimes losing everything is the only way to find yourself.